plug that in. And of course, if you wish to participate by, putting up your hand later on, and speaking directly, then you want to ensure that if you have a good working headset and microphone, to utilize that. All right. So I see lots of people already are telling me where they're joining us from today. So I see Corinne, one of our alumni, joining us from St. Kitts, Nicole Fletcher Brown, joining us from Jamaica, also Stacy Plummer, great, Gloria from Trinidad, Shanique, or is it Shavik? Shavik from Tortola, British Virgin Islands. Simmer also from BVI. Jodianne, another of our alumni from the Trendsetters, cohort 13. Welcome. Simone Huggins. Oh, Simone is just a faithful attendee to our webinar. Welcome, Simone. Anne-Mary. Hi, Anne-Mary. Where are you joining us from, Anne-Mary? Dwight? See your good morning. Yes, we'd like to know where in the region you're joining us from. Or maybe you're not joining us from outside of the region. Kim is joining us from Grenada. Oh, and Kim, somebody just said Sophia from St. Lucia. No, very special welcome to Sophia, because Sophia says this is her first webinar and it shouldn't be your last, Sophia. Shouldn't be your last. All righty. Yes, Stacey Ann, another regular from the CARICAD Secretariat. Stacey Ann is like family. Welcome. Faye, alumni. Faye from Barbados. Dwight from Barbados. Xavier from Guyana. No, I think I don't want to mispronounce the names, so forgive me, please. Farrell. Faye. I think you know who I'm referring to, darling. Good morning from Suriname. Welcome. All righty. Dear Matty, also from Guyana. Francia, from the CARICOM Secretariat in Guyana. Welcome. Adelia from SVG. Jean from Bermuda. Welcome, Jean. Jean, I rather suspect this might be your first webinar, so a special welcome. I see Shirley Ann from Montserrat. Alumni there. Sandra from the Commonwealth Local Government Forum in Trinidad and Tobago. Sandra, a special welcome. We like to see all the range of stakeholders here. Very important topic of really climate leadership and what is necessary for that. All right. And I see Duina, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, joining from the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Welcome. Denise is joining us from Antigua. Fantastic. Danette Green joining from Jamaica. Trevor, thank you. Good morning. And so before we get into our topic of climate leadership, the imperative for us here in the Caribbean, yesterday was Valentine's Day. Well, guess what? I call it February being the love month. It's also for Jamaica, it's reggae month also. It's also the month we look at heart health. And we know that heart health is important because one of the things that we're challenged with in our region is, non-communicable diseases, including heart disease, being one of the leading causes of death in our region. But I want to focus a little bit on this business of languages of appreciation. Now, some of you may be acquainted with the work of Dr. Gary Chapman when he talked about the 5 love languages. Now, he has worked with Paul White, and he has, looked at that framework and adapted it for the work environment. And so they have a wonderful book called The 5 Languages of Appreciation at Work. And I thought I'd just share a little tidbit before we get into the meatier matters, right? I see more persons joining us. Fantastic. Deborah from Barbados, another of our alumni. Sharnette from Jamaica. Nicole, also from Jamaica. Nicole is my friend of many years. Nicole knew me when I was like about 70 pounds lighter. But thank you so much for continuing to you know, register and to express this interest and to participate in our webinars. So what are these 5 languages of appreciation? So the first one is words of affirmation. And so there are some employees, they appreciate verbal acknowledgement of their work. You know, a simple good job to the employee, or publicly recognizing them, maybe in a team meeting. You know, there are some people where that is what they appreciate. They appreciate you affirming their work, verbalizing that appreciation. And that might be their primary language of appreciation. Then there are those who their language of appreciation is acts of service, right? The small gestures, that is what they really value. This goes a long way for letting them feel appreciated. Maybe they need assistance with the technology. You know, a lot of people working remotely, we're working more and more technology, and they may have a little challenge. You helping them with that, helping them to carry some office supplies, helping them with a difficult project, you know, acts of service. And as I go through these 5 languages of appreciation, I want you to think about yourself. What is your language of appreciation? Think about your team members that you work with, even your supervisor. What might be their language of appreciation? And you know, a little appreciation in the workplace goes a far way to improve the climate, the culture, and indeed engagement. The third language of appreciation is receiving gifts, right? No, we're not saying go spend lots of money. We know we don't necessarily have that. No. We're really talking about sometimes just a little token, just something that people can remember, you know, something to say, yes, I saw you, I saw the work that you did, and here's a little token just to show my appreciation. Some people, they appreciate gifts, you know. And then there's quality time. You know, oh, we were so short of time. We're just rushing. But there are persons who just spending a little time with somebody, you know. And I tell you something, because more people are working virtually, you have to be far more intentional with that. And so we can do that. You can set up a little, you know, a check-in where you spend a little time. And when you're doing that, you're not just focusing on, well, update on the task, update on the project. No, it's about, yes, we always have to do updates on our tasks, but really quality time that is centered around the person. How are you doing? Checking in with where the person is at, all right? And so for some people, yes, you know, we're using the email, we're using various messaging media, but just spending that little time is what they appreciate. No physical touch, no, we're not, you know, we know that, you know, the place that we're in, yeah? So we're not saying inappropriate physical touch, but there's some people that is their language. So a high five, you know, we know this in this time of the pandemic, but you know, they would appreciate you going out of your way to do, you know, the elbow, the fist bump, whatever is allowable given the protocols. But there are people who are just have that appreciation. I tend to be like that. I'm a tendency to be a hugger. I didn't realize I was a hugger until the pandemic, and I couldn't hug people. All right. But even though this is so limited now, but there are people who that extra effort to just that little touch, that is what they appreciate. And so I'd be curious to know, as you went through all the 5 languages of appreciation, I'd be curious, you know, which one resonates with you? Which one do you think is your primary language of appreciation? Which one would come in second for you? And you can type in the chat your responses. You know, do you feel appreciated at work? I'm curious. On a scale of 1 to 10, and 10 being the highest, how appreciated do you feel? And why? You know, here's another thing I want you to think about. think about one of the persons who report to you, if you have people reporting to you, or maybe just one of your team members, one of your peers. What do you think is their primary language of appreciation? How could you show them some appreciation today, this week? I am curious. So for me, my primary language of appreciation is acts of service. Yes. And that's so it does in life for me generally, I don't necessarily need flowery words. No, you've got to back it up with, you got to do something. That is my primary language of appreciation. And so Julian says, acts of service is hers. Yeah. Oh, I see them coming in fast and furious. So Jean says she's easy to please. Oh, that is a female. I'm saying she. Jean is easy to please. Word of affirmation, act of service. That's what will keep them whistling while they work. Stacy Plummer says words of affirmation. Also Pat, Dwight, Shavik. Yes, lots of people love words of affirmation. Faye likes physical touch and acts of service. Yeah. Nicole, words of affirmation. And as usual, we're going to share these slides with you. I'm going to share this particular set of slides with you. And it's something you can go over. It's so simple. And something you can do as a team building exercise. You can learn more about each other. Go through this with your team and say, hey, what is your primary language of appreciation? How can we show and engage each other more by showing more appreciation? Yes. So let me see. Xavier says, definitely the fist bump. That's the thing for Xavier. Chemo, words of affirmation. Yes, Gloria, words of affirmation, acts of service and quality time. I hear what you can have more than one. You might have one that is primary, one that is secondary. There might be one like, that's really not my thing at all. Adrian says words of affirmation. Yes. Now, if I don't get to, read all of them, because there's so many of you, I may not be able to get through all of them. But thank you all so much for participating. And so we are going to get right now into the meat of pièce de résistance, our topic, climate leadership, the imperative for the Caribbean. So before I get into that, just to tell you a little bit about the work that CARICAD does. Our organization, I think this year is 42 years old, and we support member states, 70 member states, in the area of public sector transformation. And we are guided to our work by our charter for the public services. This is really a charter that provides a conceptual framework for how we approach our work, how we support our member states. And it's a framework that member states can use to guide their various transformation activities. And you can see that one of the things that we are aiming to promote is sustainability, which leads us to our topic for the year 2022. We are focusing on resilience and recovery. And we recognized, I'm sure all of you are quite aware, that our region is one of the most vulnerable regions in the world with regards to the impacts of climate change. Now, I am the Leadership Development and Institutional Strengthening Specialist with CARICAD. And one of the things that we try to interweave as a cross-cutting theme in our leadership development programs is this theme of the environment. And therefore, we are very cognizant of the fact that if we are going to adopt the appropriate adaptation and mitigation strategies to tackle climate change, then that is going to require the appropriate, the transformational, adaptive even leadership to do this, to lead the way. There is nothing that can be achieved without leadership. And so this leads us to our topic for today, which is looking at climate leadership. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then introduce to you our guest for today. She is none other than Ms. Keisha Farnham. And Keisha is currently with Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. and she is the Director of Public Sector Projects. And more importantly, Keisha is like family. I had the opportunity to interface with her when she was with the Caribbean Leadership Project, later when she was with the Inter-American Development Bank. And so she is not only knowledgeable, but passionate about this topic. And so without further ado, I will invite Keisha now to unmute, to share her screen, and she's going to present on this topic for about, say, 30 minutes. And while you're listening keenly to her presentation, feel free to put your comments and your questions in the chat. And afterwards, we are going to field all your questions and we are going to invite discussion afterwards. Keisha, over to you.
Good morning, Lori. And definitely, it does feel like family, so many familiar names. And really, it does also feel like coming home. I am actually in Hawaii right now. And
yes,
it is 4 a.m. in the morning. But when Lori invited me to do this, I felt like it was something that I had to absolutely respond to. You know, the CLP has molded so much of my life and my career in Barbados. So I'm very, very excited to be part of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and get started without further ado. And so just give me a minute. Let me share the screen. Okay, how are we doing here? Excellent.
You're fine. We are seeing your screens.
All right. I am trying to. All right. Great. Ooh. All right. Excellent. So I think I want to start off by really just commending everybody for attending this morning. I think for most of us, we realize that climate change is one of the defining things of our time. It's an issue that we're going to continue to have to deal with into the future, and it's really going to shape who we are as a region. It is an imperative for the Caribbean. Lloyd would have started off by saying, the challenges that we face as a region, and it's no longer a future threat. That is absolutely clear. The science year on year shows that we are in trouble. It's as simple as that, right? I won't go into too much of the negative details because I feel like we're all fully aware of what's happening with climate change. But there are two things that I think I want to focus on. One is it's a stark reality. We are the most vulnerable in the Caribbean. It's not necessarily our fault, but we are the ones that are going to have to deal with the fallout of climate change. And if we are going to have to deal with the fallout of climate change, we need to act. And I'm going to quote our CEO, Raquel Moses, and she was also appointed as a UNFCCC ambassador last year at COP26. And she said the Caribbean has to take all necessary steps to future-proof its businesses and to make the region more sustainable and climate resilient. The question is, how do we go about doing that? And when we think about resilience, resilience is the ability of a system, community, or society who's been exposed to hazards to be able to resist, to absorb, to accommodate, to adapt, to transform, and recover from the effects of that hazard in a timely and efficient manner. And definitely we know that in the region, we are no strangers to disaster. And then you add on that a global pandemic, and you realize that we really, really have to embed resilience in the way that we operate within the Caribbean. And so here comes in the idea of the leadership context. How do we embed leadership? How do we embed climate change within the Caribbean context? And so looking at it from two aspects, you look at it from the external aspect, so from an ecological, economic, political, cultural, community or societal aspect. And then from the internal aspect, so from a sectoral, industry, the organizational reach and culture, the governance structure, and the leadership of the role in this space. When we look at it from an external point of view, and we look at the political, the cultural, and the societal elements, what are the things that we can put in place that would make sure that we are addressing these elements? In terms of the right. Hello?
Yes, we weren't hearing you for about a second, but you can continue. We're hearing you now.
Okay. I think what I'm going to do is just come off, apologies, but I'm just going to come off camera because I think my bandwidth.
No problem.
All right.
Sorry, Keisha, we aren't hearing you. All right, folks, I think she may be having a little challenge with internet connection. Just give us a minute there.
Hey, I am so sorry. My screen is completely frozen. I can hear you.
Yes, and we can hear you too.
Okay. Am I still sharing screen?
No, you have to try and share your screen again.
Okay.
All right, we're seeing the screen.
So apologies. For some reason, I think the Google Slides was frozen. So what I did was I pull up the same presentation in PDF. Can you
All right,
see
no
it?
problem. We're seeing it clearly.
All right. Okay. Are you still seeing it?
Yes, we are. We're seeing the slide. Resilience is the ability of a system.
Okay, great. All right. All right, so resilience is the ability of a system to be able to recover. And in order to be resilient, the Caribbean must be able to have strong adaptive leadership. So on the one hand, we need to embed adaptation into everything that we do. And on the other hand, we also need to shift, and we also need to mitigate. We also need to shift to a low carbon economy and mitigate emissions in the transformation, while creating, jobs, investment opportunities, new business models for our citizens. And this needs to happen across the various levels. So senior to middle level managers within not only just the government, but businesses, NGOs need to make daily decisions that bring us closer to our objective of a more resilient Caribbean. It is more than just the responsibility. It's the responsibility of all ministries. It's the responsibility of every single government partner, not just the responsibility of the Ministry of Environment, not just the responsibility of the Ministry of Climate Change, but it is definitely a holistic effort. Right. So in terms of fostering resilience and sparking sustained transformation across sectors, there is need for a long-term climate strategy. And so leadership must take into consideration what this entails. And this would entail a long-term vision and actionable policy options, political leadership, responsibility allocation, and the hello?
No, we are hearing you. Go ahead.
Okay. Responsibility allocation, the oversight role, accountability, technical leadership, a whole of government approach, and a whole of society approach. What does the long-term vision and actionable policy actually involve? So in order for a pathway to be set on how the social and the economic development needs to be addressed, there needs to be not only just a strong vision, but there needs to be actionable policy. This actionable policy needs to take into consideration a political analysis of who wins and who loses. And this approach can help to bolster the transformation that is happening, but also it will help to foster mutual conversations and should include all stakeholders. So businesses, civil society, cities, governments, etc. What this strategy will do is to help to come to a common understanding on the solutions, the business models, and the behavioral changes that need to happen within the space. The actionable policy should also take into consideration the institutional, the economic, the technological, and the social changes that need to be able to happen, and the practical policy steps that will need to be taken to get there. The political leadership would need to ensure that there is buying at the highest level. So the prime minister, the governor in some cases, but the person must be a high profile government partner or at the government level. So it demonstrates that the political leadership is in alignment with the path that is being chosen. And this will help to mitigate risk, but will also help to ensure that it is followed through. The responsibility allocation, in terms of responsibility, you need to be able to elaborate how responsibilities are divided among the different stakeholders in a coordinated and a holistic manner. And this needs to take into consideration, for example, if we, let's say we're looking at the country's overall strategy for energy, the national energy target, you're looking at how this is happening at the national level, the subnational level, at the local levels, and how it's happening between partners, so the public, the private, the civil society, and how each of these create ownership and responsibility for the long-term climate strategy. The oversight role, there must be an overseeing institutional authority to ensure that the strategy is implemented in a coordinated manner. A very good example of this is the Climate Resilient Execution Agency for Dominica, CREED, and they are a statutory government agency that was charged with the goal of making Dominica, post the devastating hurricanes, the world's first climate resilient nation. The technical leadership, of course, the science, the data, the research is important, and it has to be supported by the long-term climate strategy has to be supported by technical guidance, not only within the area. So let's say if it's climate change, if it's energy, it's not only just technical guidance within the area of energy, but also looking at technical guidance as to how the stakeholders are engaged within the space. In terms of a whole of government approach, it needs to be that all of the different ministries are acting in a cohesive manner. A really beautiful example of this is the envisioned redevelopment of the Zaquito district in Suriname. And they are looking at a sustainable green-blue city, which includes a holistic approach to sustainable development that takes full account of its current and future economic, social, and environmental impacts, while it addresses the needs of visitors, the tourism industry, the environment, and the community. And they are looking at their redevelopment plan looks at a mangrove park, a fisherman's village, the renewable energy infrastructure within the space, and the capture of foreign investment to stimulate local entrepreneurship. And all of the various ministries that are responsible are all worked into the plan and understand what their role in the plan is. So definitely a whole of government approach is important. In terms of a whole of a society approach, what needs to be included is the application of good governance principles, and ensuring that all stakeholders are consulted. It also is really important that we look at the policy development aspect of things, so that the policy development allows for an enabling environment to be able to enact the strategy. And what comes to mind, and I know Jeannie is on the call, what comes to mind is the Bermuda Sandbox Initiative, which was creating the enabling policy environment for them to be able to implement some very innovative green energy and solar energy, floating solar panel technology within that area. At the individual level, so we were looking at the macro level previously, at the individual level, so you as an individual, as a leader, many of you would have participated in the Caribbean Leadership Project. You keep coming back, and there's a reason for that, because you're building yourself as an individual, because you understand that as an individual, you feed into the whole, right? So as individuals, we need, and as individual climate leaders, whether we're at middle management, top management, we need to all be acting in synchrony. And there are certain traits, styles, and skills and knowledge areas that we need to take into consideration. So as an individual, some traits that are linked to effective climate leadership include morally driven, a morally driven individual, a holistic thinker, an inquiring or open mind, somebody who's empathetic, visionary, and courageous. In terms of the styles, radical, altruistic, creative, visionary, and inclusive. In terms of the skills, you need to be able to manage complexity. You need to be able to exercise judgment. You need to be able to challenge and innovate and to think in the long term. And in terms of your knowledge base, it needs to be able to transcend your professional field of expertise. And you need to be able to look at the global challenges. You need to take an interdisciplinary approach and look at interdisciplinary connections, change dynamics, organizational influence, and the diversity of stakeholders. Within the space of, and it's something that I feel quite passionate about, within the space of climate leadership, there are two cross-cutting themes that I think are slowly gaining traction, and people are realizing more and more the importance. I think the pandemic has highlighted for us the real power of female leadership. But just think for a moment. Take a moment and think about it. What if women and men led our world in equal measure, supported by science and evidence? How would our planet be? What would be the decisions that are being made for future generations? When I call the names Mia Amor Motley or Jacinta Ardern, what comes to mind? What type of leadership are we thinking of? And immediately we are realizing very, very, very earnestly that female leadership is crucial to tackling climate change and other crises. It is transformational, it is inclusive, and interestingly enough, when we look at the evidence, it is women who are adversely affected by climate change. And even within the space of the pandemic, women were seen to be the most vulnerable, women and children. They bear the consequences and are more acutely aware of the challenges, yet they are the ones that are usually left out of the decision-making space. And if we're talking about creating interventions within the Caribbean that meet the needs of all of our people, then key stakeholders, i.e. women, should be a part of the decision-making process. If they are, the decisions are more likely to be sustainable over time and meet the needs and challenges of women and vulnerable groups. Evidence has shown that women's participation in decision-making is good for the planet. Research has shown that women leadership are pro-environmental outcomes and are more likely to sign international environmental treaties, to create protected areas, and to have stricter climate change policies. So countries where women enjoy greater societal and political status have lower emissions and climate footprints. So women-led countries are doing better. That's the fact, right? That's a fact. And so we need to look at how, as men, we are allies for women-led leadership, but also as women stepping up into that space and looking at how we can inhabit that space and take our place within the climate leadership space. Another cross-cutting theme that is very much a hot topic is climate justice. And climate justice recognizes that although global warming is a global crisis, its effects are not felt evenly around the world. So at the global country level, the global south and the lesser developed countries are disproportionately affected by climate change. At the social, economic, public health, and group level, the adverse effects are felt by underprivileged and systematically marginalized populations. So what does that mean for the way that we look at climate change? If it is that we realize that there is systemic injustice within the climate space and that certain communities, so low-income communities, women, again, older persons, vulnerable young people, people with disabilities, they are usually disproportionately disadvantaged by climate change. Then our policy as leaders need to look at how we address these inequities and make sure that we don't further exacerbate these inequities as we move towards a greener economy. What I also wanted to do was just kind of very quickly go through what we do at CCSA. I will be sending to Loy a deck that will go into detail with some of our projects and how you can reach out to us. But in terms of our organization, for most persons, it's fairly new to them. And so just wanted to very quickly go through who we are at CCSA. So our central objective as an organization is to transform the region's economy through accelerating sound public and private investment opportunities that support climate action, economic growth. Our genesis as an organization, we would have been founded or announced in 2018, and we were featured at the first high-level commitment at the One Planet Summit. And this would have been led by Virgin Atlantic Group founder Sir Richard Branson, Prime Ministers Roosevelt, Keith Mitchell, and the Prime Minister of then Prime Minister of St. Lucia. And then in 2019, the organization would have been formalized. We would have initiated the process of registration and basically formalizing the commitments that we would have had from CARICAD, the IDB, World Bank, and other philanthropic partners. In 2020, notwithstanding COVID, we were able to consolidate, develop the operating model, incubate the organization in terms of collecting on the funding commitments that was made to the organization, and the recruitment of the leadership team would have taken place then. That would have seen myself coming on board to join our CEO, Raquel Moses, who would have been steering the organization for the last 2 years on her own, as well as our Director for Finance and Innovation, our Communications and Advocacy Lead, and our Digital Impact Strategist. And so in 2021, what we would have done was focus on the leadership team, consolidating our leadership team, implementing our operating model, re-engaging our coalition countries, of which there are 28, and many of you who are here today are representatives from our coalition countries, and then looking at how we ignite our primary projects, reassess the projects that we would have already had in our pipeline, and reviewing our business strategy, of course, in light of COVID recovery. Our core focus areas, we're looking at creating a climate smart roadmap to assist the region in shaping funding and meeting the goals of becoming climate smart. And you would have remembered that earlier, I would have mentioned that one of the key steps to having a solid or successful long-term climate smart strategy is having a roadmap, having a direction, a vision of where you want to go. Our other focus areas are the fostering energy independence by achieving 90% renewable energy for all Caribbean countries by 2035, supporting the Caribbean's implementation of 30 by 30 while maximizing benefits from nature-based solutions and financial instruments, and supporting the limiting of warming below 1.5 degrees by adding 1.5% new green jobs to transform the region's economy and build the region's regional physical and economic resilience. In terms of some of our key projects, and as I said, I would just very quickly mention them. I would have lost a lot of time on the technical difficulties earlier, so I'll just quickly run through them and make sure that you have a more detailed deck of what these projects entail. But under the area of renewable energy, the Caribbean Blended Finance for Resilience Fund, the Solar Panel Assembly, and the Caribbean Development Partners Energy Working Group. So some of these are projects and some of these are initiatives. Under the area of 30 by 30 and nature-based solutions, we're really excited about a collaboration with the Intrinsic Value Exchange Group for the creation of natural asset companies. And this is a collaboration with the New York Stock Exchange for the creation of natural asset companies, basically allowing nature to be valued and pay for itself, the preservation of the nature paying for itself. The Regional Mangroves Investment Program, the Climate Smart Agriculture Program, and the Regional Resilience Scorecard. The Financial Advisory Committee, the Investor Forum, and the Investor Forum, quite exciting. We had our first Investor Forum December last year, and it was really quite exciting to see not only just the number of projects that we were able to showcase, and then the 40 plus projects that came in post the event, but also how many investors reached out to us after the Investor Forum to say, we've been looking at investing in the region. We're interested in working with the region. How can we get access to these projects? And we've since started the process of matching projects with investors. We're going to be having an Investor Forum once every quarter, and the next upcoming Investor Forum, date to be determined, but which would be within the first quarter of this year, would be strictly for the OECS, and we'll be featuring OECS projects. In terms of a need that we saw coming out of the Investor Forum was that a lot of the projects that had been submitted to us were in different stages of development and needed to have, needed to be brought to the stage where they were investment ready. And so we collaborated with the WIPO to deliver training also late last year in December, Blue Economy Business Development Training. And we're looking at also developing additional training in collaboration with the Blue Tide Foundation. And what I'm going to also ask Lloyd to do is that when we send out the information from this webinar, we will also look at sending out an invitation, because the Blue Tide Foundation is looking at business continuity for disaster resilience. And it's a certified program. The program is absolutely free, and it's being offered to 40 Caribbean participants, alongside a cohort of participants from Latin America and Puerto Rico. So it's a really exciting development. It's something that we're definitely looking forward to, and being able to provide you with that. In terms of our team, I would have mentioned who we are. Cheryl Senhouse is our Finance Innovation Director. Damon Leon is our Communications and Advocacy Lead. And our digital impact strategist, Janelle Finlay, even though her picture is not there yet because she just recently joined us. So we're getting all her bits and ends together. She's fallen in quite well with the team and is moving forward with us. So I'm going to end there and leave some opportunity for questions, and fingers crossed, no more technical difficulties. Lloyd?
I'm here. Thank you so very much. And so I went invited to stop sharing so I could share again. Yes. And while we're doing that, there is a question in the chat already from Erica. And Erica is asking, this is when you were doing the slide about the importance of promoting female leadership, right? Erica is reminding me. And so Erica's question then is, should we presume then that diversity, equity, and inclusion have a role to play in climate risk management? So Keisha, what is, you could probably say a little bit more about that, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and its role in climate risk management.
It absolutely does. It's not even just one element. I think it's at the nexus of it. It's at the heart of it, because climate change is affecting everybody. All right, but we've established, the studies have shown it, and anecdotally we can just look around us and we can see how it is impacting vulnerable communities, we look at how, there's an unequal recovery from COVID, right? We look at just the space globally. And it definitely has a space, not just a space, but it is at the heart of how we look at climate risk management, and how we look at adaptation, and how we look at resilience.
All right, fantastic. Now we are going to spend a little bit more time in discussion, and so feel free to post your questions. Erica is saying appreciated in the chat, for appreciation for that response. But do you have any questions or comments? You can type in the chat. You can also raise your hand and we can acknowledge you and ask you to share your question. Now, one of the questions I have, Keisha, and Keisha, you've heard me talk about this before, but you and I together, but want to share it in this space. How do we really get other managers, non-environmentalists, people who are HR managers, people in charge of procurement, people in charge of roadworks, people in charge of all the range of policy spaces, to understand that they have a climate leadership role as well. And I say this against the background, I recall speaking to the then Chief Personnel Officer in the government of Dominica after Hurricane Maria, and how the impact of Hurricane Maria had serious implications for succession planning, because they actually lost persons, not just deaths, but people migrated, because there's also, climate immigration, spurred on by the impacts of climate change is also an issue. So can you speak a little bit to that, Keisha? And then there are other comments and questions in the chat as well.
So in terms of resilience and capacity building are consistent with the objectives and targets of the SDG 13 climate action goal, which is strengthening resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and natural disasters in all countries. And to be able to do that, it can't just be the ministry that's responsible for environment, or the ministry that's responsible for climate change, or the ministry that's responsible for agriculture. If we're looking at climate action, it has to be a holistic capacity development that needs to take place. And that needs to take place across the organization and with individuals within the organization. And so looking at how we build the collective capabilities, and I'll use an example. So if I am in the Ministry of Health, I have a role to play in climate change. I have a role to play in climate change in terms of how I run my hospital. There may be things that I could do to reduce my carbon footprint. And in terms of capacity development now, what we're looking at is how do we embed that knowledge in somebody who, let's say, is responsible for the management of the national hospital, right? How does that person then, in every single action, in the way that they purchase equipment, in the way that the procedures that they use, think about, okay, how can I reduce my carbon footprint? How can my operations be more effective? If I am in the Ministry of Education, one, how can my curriculum address climate change? How am I preparing young people to face the challenges? But not only that, how am I preparing them to act as individuals in a climate smart way? That's one. Yeah. Then from another point of view, simple things like, my schools. Can my schools be retrofitted, with solar panels? What are the things within the space, right, that you can look at with a climate lens? And the truth is, it's everything. And so it's everything. And if every ministry is thinking, or every leader in each ministry is thinking like that, that is going to filter down to the organization, to the ministry as an organization, right? You're talking about, if it is that the leader at the top is communicating this very, very clearly, people are being held accountable. But not only that, I think you have to take that first step of educating persons and making sure that they have the core competencies, so that there is collective capability within the ministry. And I think we take for granted, I think a lot of people know about climate change in a very esoteric, theoretical way, but they don't necessarily see how that translates into everyday life. And I do believe that education needs to take place at that aspect in terms of how do we mainstream climate change.
All right, thanks. Another question in the chat from our executive director from CARICAD, Mr. Rowe. He thanks you for the presentation, asking you to say a little bit more about the valuation of the environment and the associated benefits.
Is this the intrinsic value exchange?
I am not quite certain. So, Mr. Rowe, let me see if he's still there, and if he could just elaborate a little bit more on his question. So, yeah. Mr. Rowe, asking you to unmute. If you could just elaborate a little bit more on your question. Thanks.
Right. Well, greetings, Keisha. I trust you are well. Good. You had mentioned the valuation of the environment
Yes.
as one of the things that your organization covers. I just wanted to learn a little bit more about that and what would be the associated benefits that would arise from that.
Right. So we signed an MOU to work with the Intrinsic Value Exchange Group. And what they've created, and this actually is a project that started about 2 years ago with support from the IDB to create a natural asset company. And so what they've done is last year, they've actually launched it in collaboration with the New York Stock Exchange. And they've created a new asset class based on natural assets and looking at that as a mechanism to convert to financial capital. So for example, if you have, let's say a nature reserve, right? The value, that nature reserve being kept in pristine condition has value, right? And so there is an accounting system that is put in place where the nature reserve is evaluated. You look at intended use of the reserve, if there's any byproducts that come off of the reserve. So for some reserves around the world, there may be sustainable harvesting of wood, or there may be agriculture. It may be tourism. So some reserves you might have a flourishing tourism product, and all of those things are accounted for within the accounting system. And the nature reserve is created as a natural asset company, and then it's placed on the New York Stock Exchange, and people can invest in it, and the nature reserve can make money to sustain itself. Right. What I can, it's actually really exact. It's a really, really innovative approach. It's extremely new. It has not been implemented in the Caribbean as yet, but we're quite excited, and we're looking at a couple of sites. In the accompanying documents that will follow this workshop, there'll be some more details and the links to the website so that you could have a look at it and really, because there's a lot of moving parts to it, but it really is a very exciting development where people are finally recognizing that nature has value in its raw, untouched, beautiful form, and that it is worth preserving it.
Awesome, thank you. Now, Jamir has a question. He said, you indicated by 2035 that the goal is to have the energy requirements of the region to be 90% from renewable sources. What kind of audit was done to determine if this is an achievable goal? Do you know?
So what we would have looked at, first of all, it's a big goal, right? So you aim for the heavens, and if you miss, you fall on the treetops, right? So let's establish that one. But two, we would have looked at what the national commitments would have been across our member states, right? And that is actually quite well documented in terms of people's UN commitments, as well as there's a site that is being funded by USAID that tracks the development across the energy sectors for each of the countries based on what they said that their targets are. So while some countries are, yes, understandably behind, it is possible with the right financing and the right enabling environment. And I think that's something that I cannot stress enough, because you can have all the money, but if the policy or the legislation does not facilitate the transition, then that is a huge roadblock. And I mean, just kind of having conversations with renewable energy projects throughout the region, surprisingly enough, the money is not necessarily always the issue. What's the issue is the policy and the legislation, and how that is, how that has become a stumbling block to be able to implement projects.
All right. Now, Jodianne has question in the chat that the Caribbean relies heavily on industries that are not known for being the most environmentally friendly. We're still trying to balance environmental consciousness and empowering our people financially. There's a balance on the macro level that we are the most affected by climate change. But when bread and butter issues arise, these impacts are the least of our concerns. Does your organization or similar organizations find that when it comes to actual change, that regionally we are doing more than the very bare minimum, or is it more than lip service and PR events? What are your thoughts, Keisha?
Well, practically, right? Some countries are more dependent on energy than others, right? So fossil fuel than others. I mean, you just have to look at Trinidad and Tobago, where I'm from. I always jokingly say that every male in my family is an engineer, some type of engineer that has been trained to service the oil industry. Our economy is based on fossil fuel industry, but if you look at the macro level and you look at what the direction that the big oil companies are taking, they are transitioning, right? If you look at the commitments that they've made, they are transitioning. So the question is, yes, bread and butter matters, absolutely. For some countries, it's going to be more difficult to transition because of the economic imperative, looking at jobs, etc. But when you look at the direction that the world is taking, when you look at the direction that the big companies are taking, the commitments that they've made, and the fact that they are now pumping so much money, time, energy, training, etc., into renewables, for example, as a country, you have to start moving in that direction, right? And so looking at, I would have spoken earlier about a whole of society approach and a whole of government approach, and looking at doing an economic audit and looking at, okay, who are the quote unquote winners and losers, and being very transparent about that. What that allows is to create a space in which you start talking about, okay, how could we solve certain problems that are going to come up when an economy that is highly dependent on fossil fuel attempts to transition? What are the different things that we need to address? What are the training needs that need to be addressed? How do we bring this into this space? So I hear you, and for some countries it's definitely going to be a lot harder than others.
Yeah, I mean, it is indeed an example of a wicked problem, a wicked policy problem, and there are no easy answers. There really aren't. Hence the need for leadership. Not just like one champion, but all of us collectively bring our hearts and minds and intellect to, to this wicked problem.
Yeah.
Now, Erica has some follow-up questions here. Are we at the point where organizations must now actively incorporate environmental, social, and governance in their operational strategies? Is it that this is too new, or because climate change is being treated very much like how we treat insurance? What are your comments here, Keisha?
We absolutely need to incorporate it. And it's actually not new. It's been something that has, I mean, when you look at countries outside the region, or even if you look at countries like Puerto Rico, for example, Costa Rica, it's something that's been happening for a while now. It's something that, and we're actually in the region behind the curve for various reasons. So this is not a statement of comparison or indictment, but it's something that we should be actively doing right this minute. Yeah, because we are already behind in terms of having that incorporation happen.
All right. Now, Leslyn, now you did in your presentation talk about the roadmap that would be to be created. She's asking, are there any roadmaps holistically across the region in terms of, I think, incorporating, approaches to, achieving the SDGs as well as climate change imperatives?
So what I've found is that a lot of the countries have individual plans. And of course, if you're a part of an economic bloc, for example, like the OECS, they have a plan as well. But looking at how that plan, and it's more like at a country level. Matter of fact, actually, St. Lucia would have very recently in 2020 launch their strategic plan for how they plan to invest in their climate smart projects across the board. And they would have done that in collaboration with, who they did that in collaboration. The World Economic Forum, Sustainability Development Investment Partnership. They would have done it with that. And they did a country financing roadmap, right? And so that's the type of document that you definitely would need to have. And I do see it in some countries. But in terms of a regional approach, we have not necessarily seen a regional approach to financing. There are different types of roadmaps looking at how we get to how we do renewable energy, looking at blue economy projects, but not necessarily looking at how we finance those projects across the region. And so that's what we're hoping that our roadmap will do. And we're looking at not just the traditional sources of financing, so the multilaterals, but also looking at how we bring new financing to the region and different types of investment, impact investment, philanthropists, etc. So outside of grant funding, how do we bring other types of funding to the region?
Indeed, thank you. Now, Jameer has a question before, he has a follow. He says, while I strongly agree that climate change and incorporating mitigating measures are required, given the various and intense challenges facing our region, do you believe that at a man in the street level, this will be a priority? And therefore, when governments try and implement measures to keep aligned with international climate goals, would they not be subjected to intense criticism? That is the question that Mir is asking. And while you answer that question, I'd also ask you to give your final parting comment as we come close to the end of this webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you. Because, if it is that you as an individual are struggling to put food on the table for your kids, you're not concerned about, plastic bags. I'm just using a base example here, right? You're not concerned about a lot of things except putting food on table for your children. But I think one of the things that is critical in how we move our societies in a climate smart direction is education and awareness. So it's not just government, implementing policies and in a very top-down manner in which the communities are not involved, the NGOs, the grassroots organizations, they are not involved because they're the ones who are usually in touch with the community, right? They're the ones in touch with the everyday person, the person on the street. You're looking at how do you communicate with your school age children too as well, because they are actually powerful advocates. A lot of our young people, this generation, they realize the earth that they're inheriting and they are fighting for climate change, right? And so how do you look at embedding that into the school system so that those kids can go home, have conversations with their parents that can help their parents to understand why certain things are happening and why certain actions are taking place. And so the communication efforts needs to be something that is happening from what I say from like an intrinsic internal level. So how do we educate our young people and have them in turn educate the adults? And then, but also from a macro level. So what's the communication that we're putting out there to the general public about why we're doing certain things? So for example, I remember in one country, they implemented the plastic bag ban and the straws, etc. But there was very little information as to why this was happening. And there was people were incredibly disgruntled about it. And it eventually it worked, yes. But I think if people understood why certain things were happening and that was explained in an easy to understand way. And I think sometimes communication gets lost in development speak. And so when we're communicating about climate change, we're using this language that doesn't reach the community, that doesn't reach the everyday person. And so how do we communicate? How do we get that information out there? Not only from a public awareness point of view, but from an educational program point of view as well. And in terms of my parting comments, I want to apologize for the disastrous start. It really threw me for a bit. For some reason, my screen was freezing up and I couldn't click on it. But I do want to say that I'm really grateful for this opportunity. And I do see the need for an extraordinary push towards resilience within the region. And the role that policymakers have is extraordinary. The challenges are extraordinary, but the role that policymakers have is also extraordinary. And you have the opportunity to be extraordinary within this space and to look at how we future-proof our industries, future-proof our sectors, look at how we build forward with a climate smart lens, looking at climate change as a collective challenge, how we do a collective coordinated response, how we include all stakeholders. It's not going to be an easy job, but I think in the Caribbean, if nothing else we've proven is that we're resilient. Year on year, we face these incredible challenges and we keep coming back and we keep building back. And so I don't think it is outside our scope and our ability to be able to move forward in this direction. And I genuinely believe that it takes individual action. So it might seem like you're struggling against a tide, but I think it takes individual action to create that critical mass that's necessary for us to be able to move the region forward within towards a climate smart zone.
Okay, Keisha, it is indeed our delight. Thank you so much for taking the time of getting up, as we say in Jamaica, when dog afraid, early in the morning, for the rest of you, to share with us. And folks, all our registrants will get as Keisha said, a copy of the presentation along with other information about learning opportunities in this field, as well as other additional information. And we are going to be continuing to, have the collaboration with Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. So once things like their roadmaps and so on are developed, we are going to be hearing about it, and together we will continue to share with the wider community about this. And you can see in the chat, Keisha, many persons are expressing appreciation for this. So just to wrap up, continuing with our theme of resilience and recovery. So next month, you can look out for our advertisement. The next webinar is going to be on March 22, and we'll be looking at the emotionally resilient organization. And you'll see there listed other webinars that are coming up. So in April, we're looking at improving labor productivity, a public sector context. In May, we are going to have a whole webinar series on this topic of citizen-centered service excellence, where we're featuring speakers from around the region on this topic, looking at examples of best practices, policy, and just some capacity building around this area. And in June through to July, we will once again deliver our introduction to leadership workshops. It will be a webinar series. And so you can look out for those advertisements, and you can definitely register as they are sent out. Last but not least, we have a call for applications open for our Leading Change workshop. And that will be delivered in April of this year. So if you are interested in learning more about our Leading Change workshop, please email us at info@caricad.net. And so we thank you once again for attending. For persons who who had wanted to attend but could not, just invite them to go to our YouTube channel, where they will see the link to the recording of this webinar. And so we like to hear from you. So can you just fill out our feedback poll? We want to hear how that goes. So I think as soon as you exit, the feedback poll will turn up for you. And so please do complete that. We really believe at CARICAD, feedback is a gift. And it just once been said, it is a breakfast of champions. So thank you all so very much. And we look forward to your participation in our upcoming webinar series. Thank you all.